David Bennett stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, admiring the glittering skyline of downtown Chicago. At 42, he had everything society deemed worthy of envy: a thriving investment firm, a mansion in Highland Park, and most importantly, a picture-perfect family that could have stepped straight out of a magazine cover. "Mr. Bennett, your wife is on line 1," his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. David's face softened into a genuine smile as he picked up the phone. "Hey, sweetheart," Sarah's melodious voice filled his ear. "Don't forget Michael's science fair tonight at 7. He's been practicing his presentation about renewable energy all week." "Wouldn't miss it for the world," David replied, already reaching for his keys. "Is Emma excited about being his assistant?" Sarah's laugh echoed through the line. "She's wearing her lab coat from last Halloween and hasn't taken it off since breakfast. I think we might have 2 scientists in the making." The drive home was a familiar comfort, his Tesla gliding past manicured lawns and stately homes. David often found himself marveling at how far they'd come from their humble beginning, Sarah teaching kindergarten while he built his firm from scratch, sharing a tiny 1-bedroom apartment and dreams bigger than their bank account. As he pulled into their circular driveway, the sight that greeted him made his chest swell with pride. Through the bay window, he could see Michael, their 10-year-old son, gesturing animately at his solar panel model while Emma, their 7-year-old daughter, handed him tools with the serious concentration only a child could muster. Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor with them, her honey blonde hair catching the afternoon light, looking as beautiful as the day they met in college. Inside, the house buzzed with the comfortable chaos of family life. The kitchen counter displayed Emma's latest art project, a family portrait where everyone had slightly too long arms and impossibly wide smiles. Michael's science fair posters were spread across the dining table, covered in his meticulous handwriting and carefully drawn diagrams. The smell of Sarah's famous lasagna wafted from the oven, a Tuesday tradition that had survived their journey from struggling newlyweds to suburban success story. Daddy Emma launched herself at him, her lab coat fluttering behind her like a superhero's cape. "We made everything work. The little light actually turns on when you put it in the sun." Michael looked up from his project, his dark eyes so like his father, shining with excitement and a touch of nervous energy. "Dad, do you think the judges will like it? I added extra data about cost efficiency like you suggested." David scooped up Emma with one arm and ruffled Michael's hair with his free hand. "They're going to love it, chump. You've done all the research, and you understand the material inside and out." Sarah appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. The way she looked at him still made his heart skip a beat after 15 years of marriage. She was his anchor, his partner in every sense of the word, the one who believed in him when he was just a kid with big dreams and an empty wallet. "The lasagna needs 10 more minutes," she said, moving to kiss his cheek. "Just enough time for a quick change before we head to school." Looking at his family in that moment, David Bennett felt like the richest man in the world. Not because of the numbers in his bank account or the prestigious address on his business card, but because of the love that filled every corner of their home. It was a perfect life, carefully built on years of hard work, trust, and unwavering commitment to each other. He couldn't imagine anything ever changing that. Little did he know, fate had other plans. In less than 24 hours, their picture-perfect world would be shattered by a single moment on a rain-slicked road, testing the very foundations of their family's bond in ways none of them could have predicted. The rain came suddenly that Wednesday afternoon, turning Chicago's streets into mirrors of gray sky. Sarah was driving home from grocery shopping, her mind on the chicken soup she planned to make for Michael, who had been fighting a cold. Later, the police report would note that the other driver ran the red light at 60 miles per hour, their brakes failing on the wet pavement. The impact sent Sarah's SUV spinning across 3 lanes of traffic. The call reached David during a board meeting. "Mr. Bennett, your wife has been in an accident. She's at Northwestern Memorial." The words turned his world to static. Hours blurred in the hospital waiting room. Michael and Emma huddled against him, their small bodies trembling with fear. When the surgeon finally emerged, his face bore the weight of life-altering news. The impact severely damaged her spinal cord at the T10 vertebra. "Mrs. Bennett is paralyzed from the waist down. The paralysis is permanent." The first month was a blur of determination and hope. David hired the best rehabilitation specialists, converted their first floor into a wheelchair-accessible space, and took time off work to help Sarah adjust. "We'll get through this together," he promised, holding her hand through endless physical therapy sessions. Sarah, despite her pain, focused on their children's needs, teaching herself to hug them from her wheelchair, learning new ways to be present in their lives. But as weeks turned to months, the strain began to show. Medical bills mounted, even with insurance. The modifications to their home, the specialized equipment, the ongoing therapy, it all carried a staggering price tag. David found himself working longer hours, trying to maintain their lifestyle while covering the endless stream of expenses. "I can't keep doing this," Sarah whispered one night, after struggling for 30 minutes to transfer from her wheelchair to their bed. David's patience, worn thin by exhaustion, snapped. "Well, I can't either," he shouted, immediately regretting his words at the sight of tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry, I'm just tired." The dynamics at home shifted imperceptibly at first, then more dramatically. 10-year-old Michael started getting up early to help his mother with breakfast, learning to steady her cup of coffee as she adjusted in her chair. Emma, once bubbling with endless stories, grew quieter, watching her father's increasingly frequent outbursts with worried eyes. David's frustration grew with each setback. The man who once rushed home for family dinners now found excuses to stay late at the office. The intimate moments with Sarah, once natural and loving, became awkward exchanges clouded by resentment. He grew tired of being both breadwinner and caregiver, of the constant adjustments and accommodations their new life required. "The kids miss you," Sarah said one evening, as David prepared to leave for another urgent meeting. "The kids need stability," he replied sharply. "And that means someone has to keep this family afloat financially." The unspoken truth hung between them. He was drowning in responsibilities he never asked for, and she was trapped in a body that no longer obeyed her commands. Their once perfect life had become a maze of medical appointments, insurance battles, and mounting bills that seemed to mock their former prosperity. Sarah watched him grow more distant, saw the way his eyes avoided her wheelchair, noticed how he flinched when she needed help with basic tasks. She recognized the signs but couldn't bring herself to acknowledge what they meant. Not yet. Not while Michael was teaching himself to cook simple meals, not while Emma was learning to help with her mother's therapy exercises, not while their family was hanging by increasingly fragile threads. The breaking point was approaching, as inevitable as the changing seasons. None of them could have guessed just how complete the break would be, or how their 10-year-old son would become the unlikely hero of their story. Jessica Chen arrived at Bennett Investment Group as the new head of marketing, her Harvard MBA and sleek presentations breathing fresh energy into their corporate strategy meetings. David found himself lingering after these meetings, their conversations shifting from market trends to personal stories over late-night takeout in his office. "You can't keep sacrificing your own life," Jessica said one evening, her hand resting sympathetically on his arm. "Everyone has limits, David. Even you." At home, Sarah noticed the changes. The way David's phone always lay face down. How he stopped sharing stories about his day. The growing silence during family dinners, broken only by their children's uncertain attempts at conversation. "Daddy, will you help with my science project?" Emma asked one evening. "It's about butterflies, like the ones we used to watch in the garden." "Not tonight, princess." Daddy's tired, his voice was distant, his eyes fixed on his phone screen. Michael observed it all with an old soul's understanding, watching his father's chair sit empty more often than not. He started doing his homework beside his mother's wheelchair, reading his essays aloud to her, filling the silence his father left behind. The night David left came after a particularly difficult day. Sarah had fallen during a transfer, requiring a visit from emergency services. When David arrived home late, his decision was written in the packed suitcase by the door. "I can't do this anymore," he said, avoiding Sarah's eyes. "The company's struggling. The medical bills keep coming. I'm drowning here." "David, please," Sarah whispered, her hands gripping her wheelchair's arms. "We can figure this out. The kids." "I've transferred enough money for a few months," he cut her off, reaching for his suitcase. "I'll send support once I'm settled." Neither of them knew Michael stood in the shadows of the hallway, watching his father walk out the door. In his hand, he clutched the Father's Day card he'd planned to give earlier, handmade creation celebrating the world's best dad. The next morning brought cruel discoveries. David hadn't just taken his clothes, he'd emptied their main savings account, leaving only a fraction behind. The joint credit cards were cancelled. Sarah sat at their kitchen table, staring at their suddenly dire financial statements, while Emma cried in her lap. Mum Michael's voice was steady as he placed 2 pieces of toast and a cup of coffee in front of her. "I saw in the newspaper that Mr. Wilson needs help delivering papers. I could do it before school." Sarah looked at her son, a beautiful, brave boy trying to be the man his father had failed to be. "Oh, sweetheart," she pulled him close, her tears falling into his hair. "We'll find another way." But in the quiet of that morning, as Emma huddled against her mother's wheelchair and Michael stood tall, despite his breaking heart, they all knew their lives had irrevocably changed. The fairy tale was over. Survival was all that mattered now. Michael Bennett learned more in the month after his father left than most children learn in years. YouTube became his teacher how to help someone transfer from wheelchair, basic cooking for beginners, simple home repairs. Each night, after Emma fell asleep, he practiced the movements, determined to be ready when needed. The paper route started on a Monday. At 5:30 a.m., Michael's alarm buzzed. He slipped out quietly, careful not to wake his sister or mother. Mr. Wilson, the route manager, watched skeptically as the small boy shouldered the heavy bag. "You sure about this, kid?" Michael nodded, thinking of the unpaid electric bill he'd seen on the kitchen counter. "Yes, sir, I can do it." Every morning, through rain or shine, Michael delivered those papers. His shoulders ached, his fingers cramped from folding, but he never missed a house. The first paycheck, $86.50, felt like a fortune. He handed it to his mother with quiet pride. Sarah tried to refuse. "Sweetheart, this is your money." "We need groceries, Mum," he said simply, in a tone that reminded her painfully of his father's business voice. "And Emma needs new shoes for school." At home, Michael developed a routine. Wake at 5:30, deliver papers, return home to help Mum with her morning routine. He learned to steady her during transfers, to arrange her pillows just right, to notice when pain clouded her eyes, even though she tried to hide it. School, then home to help Emma with homework while Mum rested. Dinner, usually simple things like spaghetti or sandwiches, then bedtime stories for Emma. "Why does Daddy hate us?" Emma asked one night, curled against her brother while he read her favorite book. Michael closed the book, choosing his words carefully. "Dad doesn't hate us, Em. He just forgot how to be brave. But we remember, right? We're Bennetts. We stick together." The hardest moments came when their mother's wheelchair got stuck, or when she dropped something she couldn't reach. Michael learned to read the frustration in her face, to step in before she had to ask. He became an expert at distracting Emma during these times, turning potential tears into games. "Look, Em, if we use Mum's reacher grabber like this, it's like having robot arms. Let's see who can pick up the most marbles." Some nights, after everyone was asleep, Michael would sit at the kitchen table with their bills, his math homework forgotten beside him. He learned to decode the threatening letters, to understand words like overdue and final notice. His paper route money helped, but it wasn't enough. Still, he never let his mother see him worry. The morning she found him practicing wheelchair transfers with his stuffed bear, Sarah broke down crying. "I'm so sorry, Michael. This shouldn't be your responsibility. You're just a child." Michael hugged her, his small arms strong and sure. "Mom, remember what you always tell your kindergarten kids. We help each other because that's what families do. It's okay if you're not strong right now. I can be strong for a while." In those quiet moments before dawn, as Michael folded newspapers or helped his mother dress, he sometimes caught glimpses of himself in windows or mirrors. He looked different and older in the eyes, straighter in the spine. The child who once needed Superman bandages for every scratch was learning that real strength often comes wrapped in ordinary moments, in choosing to stay when others leave, in finding courage not despite fear but because of love. His father had walked away from difficulty. Michael walked toward it, one paper route, one wheelchair transfer, one bedtime story at a time. At 10 years old, he was becoming the kind of man his father had failed to be. David's new life with Jessica had the glossy sheen of expensive restaurants and weekend getaways, but beneath it lay a crumbling foundation. His distraction at work, combined with increasingly risky investment decisions, began to show in the company's bottom line. Major clients, sensing his instability, quietly moved their portfolios elsewhere. "You're not the man I thought you were," Jessica said over dinner at their usual five-star restaurant, her voice carrying the sharp edge of disappointment. "The David Bennett I fell for was decisive, confident. Now you second-guess every trade, jump at every phone call. What happened to you?" What happened was guilt, though he wouldn't admit it. Every time he checked his phone, he half expected to see Michael's name, remembering how his son used to send him pictures of science projects and soccer victories. Now, there was only silence. The bankruptcy rumors started in the financial district and spread like wildfire. Jessica watched their effect on David with growing dismay. His hands shook during meetings. Dark circles appeared under his eyes. The confident businessman who had swept her off her feet was dissolving before her eyes. "Maybe if you reached out to your family," she suggested one evening, but David cut her off. "They're better off without me," he snapped, but his voice cracked on the last word. The final blow came when the SEC launched an investigation into some of his recent trades. In his desperation to recover losses, he'd skirted dangerously close to illegal territory. Jessica found the investigation notice in his briefcase. "I can't be part of this," she said, packing her designer clothes into expensive suitcases. "I didn't sign up for a man who abandons his disabled wife and plays fast and loose with federal regulations." "Jessica, please." David reached for her, but she stepped back, her face hard. "You know what's ironic? You left them because you said you were drowning. But look at you now, you're not drowning, David. You've already hit bottom." Alone in their luxury apartment, David faced his reflection in the bathroom mirror. The man staring back was a stranger grey at the temples, lines etched deep around his mouth, eyes haunted by choices he couldn't undo. His phone buzzed with another call from his lawyers. The company was hemorrhaging clients. His reputation, once golden, was now toxic in the financial world. In his wallet, he still carried a crumpled photo from before the accident: Sarah's bright smile, Emma's wild curls, Michael's proud stance beside his science fair trophy. He'd spent 2 years running from that life, only to destroy everything he'd run toward. With trembling fingers, he dialed a number he'd never deleted. "Sarah," he whispered when the voicemail beeped. "I know I have no right, but I need help." The diner where they agreed to meet was quiet in the late afternoon. Michael sat straight-backed in the booth, his school uniform still neat despite the long day. At 12 now, his face had lost some of its childhood softness, replaced by a gravity that made David's chest ache. "You look good," son, David started, his designer suit wrinkled from nervous fidgeting. "How's school?" "Why are you really here?" Dad. Michael's voice was calm, steady. No trace of the excited boy who once bounded into his father's arms remained. David swallowed hard, his practiced speech deserting him. I made some mistakes. The company's in trouble. I thought maybe since the house is still partially in my name." "You want Mum to refinance the house to save your company?" Michael's question cut through the air like a blade. "The house she's made wheelchair accessible, where Emma finally stopped having nightmares." "I know I don't deserve." "You're right, you don't." Michael pulled out a small notebook, opening it to reveal careful columns of numbers. "This is our monthly budget. I keep track now. Mum's disability checks, my paper route money, the online tutoring she does when she's strong enough. Every dollar matters." David stared at his son's meticulous handwriting, shame burning in his throat. "Michael, when you left." Michael continued, his voice wavering slightly for the first time, "I thought it was my fault. That maybe if I'd been a better son, you would have stayed. But then I watched Mom. She couldn't walk anymore, but she never stopped being our mother. She cried at night when she thought we couldn't hear. But every morning she was there with a smile, helping Emma with her hair, checking my homework." He looked directly into his father's eyes. "That's when I understood what real strength is. It's not about running away when things get hard. It's about staying. It's about choosing your family every single day, even when it hurts." David felt tears sliding down his cheeks. "When did you get so wise?" "Someone had to grow up," Michael replied simply. "Mom taught me that love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice you make over and over. Like when she chooses to help me with my science project even though her hands shake from fatigue, or when Emma scraped her knee and Mom couldn't run to her." so she taught her to be brave enough to come to her instead. He pushed the notebook across the table. "We can't help you with money, Dad, but if you want to know what real wealth looks like, come home next Tuesday. It's Emma's ballet recital." Mom learned to do stage makeup from her wheelchair, just so Emma wouldn't feel different from the other girls whose moms helped backstage. Standing up, Michael straightened his tie, a gesture so familiar it made David's heart break. "The dad I remember used to say that a Bennett never gives up. Maybe it's time you remembered that too." As his son walked away, David sat alone in the booth, the budget notebook open before him. Between the careful rows of numbers, he saw something he'd been blind to 2 years ago: the quiet courage of choosing love over fear, of finding strength in standing still rather than running away. David stood in the back of the school auditorium, watching Emma twirl across the stage in her pink tutu. In the front row, Sarah sat in her wheelchair, beaming with pride, while Michael recorded the performance on his phone. The sight of his family, carrying on without him, hit harder than any financial loss. After the performance, he approached them slowly, clutching a bouquet of roses. "Emma, you were beautiful up there." His daughter stared at him uncertainly before accepting the flowers. Sarah's face remained neutral, protective, but she didn't wheel away. "I've been seeing a therapist," David said quietly. "I sold the apartment, most of my assets. It won't fix everything, but I'd like to start repaying what I took if you'll let me." Michael stepped forward, positioning himself between his father and his family, not aggressively, but protectively. "Actions, Dad, not words." Over the following months, David proved himself through small, consistent steps. He attended Emma's rehearsals, helped Michael with his paper route, and learned the proper way to assist with wheelchair transfers. His presence was cautious, humble, no longer the confident businessman, but a man learning to be worthy of forgiveness. The turning point came during a family dinner, now a weekly tradition. As Sarah struggled with her fork, David instinctively reached to help, but Michael stopped him. "Mum likes to do it herself first," Michael explained. "She'll ask for help if she needs it. It's about dignity, Dad. Love means knowing when to step in and when to step back." David watched his son, this wise young soul who had stepped up when he had stepped out and finally understood. True strength wasn't in escaping difficulties, but in facing them together. Sarah began allowing David to join her physical therapy sessions. Emma started calling him Daddy again, and Michael, while still watchful, slowly relaxed his guard. They weren't the same family they'd been before the accident. They were stronger, their love tested and proven by fire, and at the center of their healing was a young boy who had taught them all what it meant to love unconditionally. Today, the Bennetts are different from the picture-perfect family they once appeared to be. Sarah's wheelchair is a permanent fixture, but it's no longer seen as a symbol of limitation. Instead, it represents the strength that rebuilt their family. David works from home now, running a small consulting firm that allows him to be present for his family. Michael, entering his teens, carries himself with the quiet confidence of someone who discovered their strength early in life. Their story teaches us that true family bonds aren't tested by success, but by adversity. Sometimes it takes a child's wisdom to remind adults of what matters most, that love isn't about perfection, but about showing up every day, choosing each other repeatedly, even when the path is difficult. If this story touched your heart, please share it with others who might need to hear its message. Have you experienced a moment when difficulty brought your family closer instead of breaking it apart? Share your story in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories about family, resilience, and the power of unconditional love. Remember, every family has its own journey, but it's how we walk that path together that matters most. Because sometimes, the greatest lessons about love come from those we're supposed to teach.